why do publicly owned airports tend to perform so poorly? The answer isn't all that surprising. There is a common belief amongst the general public that airports are essentially just a place for rich people to play with their expensive toys. Is that true? No, not by a long shot. And that's not just me being contradictory, that's a well researched fact. But before we get into that, do us the favor of liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to us. And of course, leave a comment here below letting us know what you think about this hot button issue. The research we're talking about today originates with the Zwelbar Zong consultancy. Dr. Mike Jones was the principal researcher on this while he was working on his doctorate at the University of Florida. Now, Mike is not just some egghead from someplace. Mike spent 8 years at the Airport Authority in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Part of that time was as chairman. In a nutshell, Mike knows his stuff. And while working on his doctorate at the University of Florida, Mike looked at 236 small, publicly owned airports. Not surprisingly, perhaps, Mike found that the majority of these airports are underperforming economically, mostly due to mismanagement. It will come as no surprise to most people involved in aviation on the general aviation side. Many of these airport authorities are staffed by politicians, people who really don't have any background in aviation and very limited understanding of how aviation actually works. Is it really a wonder that a business would be underperforming when the management doesn't really understand the industry they're in? Ignorance and poor performance kind of go hand in hand. You're shocked, I know. Now, some of those airports are independently operated and some fall under some other governmental entity like the Department of Public Works. When Mike looked at those performance figures for how these airports were doing, he found the airports that were managed under some other umbrella organization within the government underperformed the dedicated operations by 60%. In dollars, that loss averages out to about $20 million annually. Extrapolate that out to the national level, and we're talking about $35 billion. Ouch. That's not great. So, why do publicly owned airports tend to perform so poorly? The answer isn't all that surprising. It's largely because they're managed by governmental institutions, which are populated by employees who have no incentive to innovate or provide exceptional customer service, or even to invest wisely. That's not just my opinion, by the way, that's what the research shows. Consider these 4 factors the researchers found to be true. Not all airport authorities perform equally. That's obvious. But it might be surprising to find that about a quarter of them aren't actively engaged. Now, what are the odds you're going to run a successful business at arm's length, where you're not actually involved in some way? They also found that volunteer pilot advisory boards aren't really all that productive or successful. They often have no ability to really influence their political leadership to make good decisions or enact on those decisions. At least in my experience, and this is personal experience, these are generally feel-good boards that a governmental entity puts together so the users of the airport feel like they're involved, although they're actually not. Another factor they found was shared authorities don't tend to work that well. And a shared authority is where one entity, one governmental oversight group, is responsible for multiple airports. What generally happens is there's the favored airport that does fairly well, and the others kind of fall by the wayside. They just wither on the vine. And that's logical. The best results generally come from putting your real effort into an entity. And if you're focusing on one to the exclusion of 2 or 3 or 4 others, the odds of all those entities performing well or at the same level is non-existent. And here's one that might be surprising to you. Privatized airports, where the host farms out the responsibility of managing the field to some private company, almost never works out well. Outsourcing has its place. Privatization does work in some areas, but In the case of an airport, the host has given up a valuable asset and the ability to manage that asset. They really have no input on it after that, or no substantial input. The price for this is they have no ability to really invest in their own asset, manage it, and reap the rewards of doing a good job. Now, your airport may be in the minority. They may have figured out how to make their airport run well and be a real economic engine that benefits the community at large. But if your airport did that, be proud. You're part of the few. This is kind of sad, in my opinion, because it's not rocket science. An airport is a business, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned, it's a business. And you have to manage a business actively and responsibly in order for it to be a success. Under ideal circumstances, that airport business should support multiple other businesses. That way, we can expand on the value of the asset to produce value for more than just the city government itself or the county government itself. That success spreads out across the community to dozens or hundreds or thousands of other people. One of the best run airports I've ever come across in my life is Lakeland Linder International Airport in Lakeland, Florida. You may be familiar with Lakeland as the host site of the Sun and Fun Fly-In every spring, the second largest aviation event in North America. It may surprise those of you who have been to Sun and Fun to think 2 decades ago, Lakeland Linder was not the success story it is today. As a matter of fact, it was an underperforming airport that ran annual deficits and had an enormous amount of unleased office and hangar space and no real direction. A former city manager actually described the airport as a money pit. What changed was the management, not the dirt, not the air, not the weather, not the overall economic conditions. It was the management. New management came in with an actual vision and the ability to put together a team of employees who would focus on providing exceptional customer service, because aviation in large part is a service industry, and certainly running an airport is a service industry. If you focus on your core business, you're probably going to be successful. If you get distracted by all kinds of little ancillary things that maybe feel good but don't actually add to the bottom line, you might be in trouble. What really surprised me about the new management at Lakeland Linder when they got rolling was they changed the default answer that they would provide when people came in with an idea for a new business or wanting to rent space or wanting to do something different on the airport. Traditionally, governmental employees respond with a knee-jerk response of, no, we can't do that. There's a rule, there's an ordinance, there's something. They have a whole list of reasons why you can't do the thing you want to do that would have paid them money and brought in new customers and provided value to the community. That's the problem with the traditional governmental view. And I'm not dumping on the people in government. It's the method they use to work on things. They just don't see themselves as being in the role of providing customer service. They see themselves in the role of protecting their turf. That's not a business. Lakeland completely flipped that knee-jerk reaction on its head. Instead of saying, no, we can't, their default answer became, yes, sure. Let's see how we can make that work for both of us. That's a completely different perspective, and that led to tremendous success at Lakeland Linder. When Lakeland's management was lacking, performance of the airport was poor. Those two things go hand in hand. They are unavoidable. There were no flight schools on the field. There were limited services available, and really, frankly, there wasn't a lot of reason to go there. The result of that is that the airport is rightfully viewed as a place for rich people to play with their expensive toys, because there is nothing there for non-pilots, for people who aren't aircraft owners. If you can't rent an airplane and you can't learn to fly and you're having trouble getting maintenance done, this really isn't a viable asset to the city. And that's why so many cities start looking at, let's close this airport and do something we understand, like lease the property to a developer and let them build apartments, or put in a park or something that really doesn't benefit the city as much as a well-run airport that understands its role in the bigger picture. And there is no better example of that than Lakeland Linder International Airport. When new management came with a vision and the ability to build that team and the ability to carry out that vision, suddenly flight schools started showing up, and there are multiple flight schools at Lakeland today. There are multiple maintenance operations. Two hotels leased space and built facilities there on the grounds. Everything changed at Lakeland. They even had the foresight to bring in a public high school and a state college aerospace program. All of a sudden, Lakeland Linder Airport isn't just for a small group of pilots. It's for all sorts of people in the community that see value in the airport, including a restaurant where anybody can come on out and spend time at the airport and start getting comfortable with what general aviation is. They've even added commercial passenger service and an Amazon Prime facility. Over a period of years, Lakeland Linder went from being an underutilized, underperforming airport that was described as a money pit by their own city manager to a real asset to the community that has become a focal point for how to run an airport well so that the entire community benefits from that asset. Management made all the difference. The perspective of how to manage the airport, what to do with the space, how to make things work in such a way that people are attracted to the airport by the activity they see there, and then they're encouraged. Maybe I could get involved here by learning to fly, getting a job, getting an education, doing something that pertains to aviation or aeronautics. And let's face it, with a high school and a college on the field, any business on the field is looking at potential new hires right over there at the schools. And those kids are looking at those businesses as their entry point to a global transportation and freight industry that just gets bigger year after year, one that will pay them a decent wage and really put them on a solid footing for a successful life, all because the airport is well managed. Which brings us to the obvious question, what does this have to do with you? How can the success of Lakeland Linder International Airport going from underutilized to top quality, how can that affect you and your community? Well, examples of success are a great way to plan out your own success. Are you willing to have conversations with your city or county officials? Are you willing to put together a group of users of the airport to start providing real insight to the people who make the decisions about how the airport runs? If you're up for the challenge of creating a plan and sharing with the officials how to execute on it to make your airport as successful as a place like Lakeland, there is hope. Because the airport isn't just a place for rich kids to play with their expensive toys. It's also a place to create the opportunity for those kids to get involved in an internationally valuable business that will take them anywhere they want to go. And for those who want to get a pilot certificate or a maintenance certificate, the FAA certificate is the gold standard around the world. You will work. You can go anywhere. And it's not just pilots and mechanics, engineers, air traffic control, avionics technicians, all sorts of things are available if we would just use the airport as the remarkable community asset it could be, even though it brings in those rich kids to play with their expensive toys. And let's be honest, would it be so bad if wealthy people came to your town and spent money? Thanks so much for sticking with me through this video. I know this is a weird topic and I know it's political, but it's also economic and it involves you directly. Even if you're not a wide body captain with tens of thousands of hours of experience, you are a member of the community. You do have an understanding of aviation, and you just might be the catalyst that gets the change started in your community and really makes things happen for the better. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing you right back here next time at MadPropsAero.